want to talk to you about all the places you've worked and your strategies for improving the popularity of women's sports every step of the way.
Okay.
So first, Overtime Women's V-Ball. You founded it. It has 1 million followers on Instagram. My literature review for this project talked about social media having no limits like there are with TV scheduling. So it can combat the fact that TV won't show as much women's sports in prime time. In a lot of cases, like we talked about in our other interview, female athletes are bigger social media influencers than men. So, what are the best ways to take advantage of social media when promoting women's sports?
Yeah, I think you hit it spot on there. I'd say the first thing is really the fact that because when you focus on basically the democratization of broadcasting sports, right? And specifically to women's sports, when you add a phone and social media in the mix, essentially now women get to really take their coverage into their own hands, right? And so when you can do that and you already have an audience and a platform, right, then you can get more, you can get highlights out there, you can get games out there, you can cover different types of people. You can go anywhere you want. And I think specifically for overtime, what was tough and what people don't really understand is that I was really just, I'm one person. Like it may, overtime may be a company as a whole, but as far as their women's sports department, I was the only person in charge of coverage, right? So with that comes great responsibility because you just have to keep in mind as you have a platform and you're able to showcase women's sports and women's highlights, right? You're really dictating who gets the coverage, right? Versus a player that's built their own social media and they can take their coverage into their own hands by either hiring a videographer or having their mom or dad record and just kind of post it on their account and then tag bigger accounts. But to me, that's one of the greatest things that I think has ever happened to women's sports is social media because um, when you're a women's sports fan, naturally you have to search and find and go above and beyond and purchase all these different things just to find your favorite teams or your favorite players playing. Versus when you're able to put some of this coverage on social media, at any time I have access as a fan to women's sports content for free.
And how long did it take Overtime Women's Basketball to reach 1 million followers? Just so I'm talking about it in my paper.
Yeah, so originally Marcus Crenshaw started She Hoops Network, which I later joined and helped him build. And I think by the time we sold it to Overtime, it might have been at 186,000 followers, like something that was fairly low. And I believe that was back in like 20 2018. I can double check kind of on my LinkedIn when we did that sale. And then Overtime WBB recently just hit 1 million on Instagram. Um, I believe either beginning of this year, end of kind of last year in 2023. So whatever that math is between 2018 and 2023. So let's say anywhere from like 5 to 7 years, because I don't want to discredit all the work we did with She Hoops Network just to get it there at a time when Instagram had just gotten video. But what I will point out is back in 2019, when I started Overtime WBB on TikTok, we were able to hit 1 million followers within 1 year to 2 years, right? And that was just consistent posting, consistent coverage, being an early adopter on the platform. So how, for me personally, how I always measure what what could be the maximum growth, right? Or what is the target? And I think a lot of that is to a degree led by the WNBA. Because I believe, as far as women's basketball accounts go on Instagram, the WNBA was the first to get to 1 million followers, right? So seeing that to me, I knew it was possible to get Overtime WBB to a million followers, right? Because as we kind of see the baseline for women's basketball, that's the that was the highest, right? And now we see people like Angel Reese, Paige Beckers, I believe Caitlin Clark is about to hit a million followers, right? So we see kind of this comparison with social media and now also women's athletes in general being able to hit that 1 million mark threshold. And when I say women's athletes in general, I'm talking specifically about women's basketball.
So next, I want to talk about Sad Girl Hours. How can branding and clothing in particular promote the popularity of women's sports?
Great question. I think the most recent example is with Dawn Staley, and her actually using the Together sweatshirt, which I actually used to work at Together as well too. And the slogan "Everyone watches women's sports," right? Although um, she posted it on social media too, right? We see her wearing the hoodie. But where did we also see that was coverage on ESPN, right? It was one of the highlights. We saw her in interviews. Um, and to me, it starts to transcend when people can see a message, whether that be on a t-shirt or a hoodie, and it's something that maybe like a small niche group can relate to, but it gets them talking about it, right? Now we can see our message transcending on not just a national scale but a global scale, right? It's everyone watches women's sports, right? It makes people that are women's sports fans like really excited. And at the same time, right, like it's not too often you see coaches or anyone necessarily like wearing messages on t-shirts and sweatshirts during an actual game, right? Like you see stuff in practices, press conference, but I think to me, Don Staley being able to take that message and show that message really gets people talking. And then for Sad Girl Hours specifically, um, it's really, I didn't necessarily think of it as a hoodie. I thought of it as art, right? Just that kind of message and that picture on the back where um, so many of us, whether you're a man or a woman or however you identify, can relate to the message to some degree. If you've ever played sports or even worked in sports, right? You think about even you, Zach, since I've known you since back in our Maryland days, how much time and effort you've really put in to your passion and just working in sports, right? And when you think about the blood, sweat, and tears, it's a message that no matter what you can relate to. And even I don't know if you saw, but like Ryan Clark, who played football, him wearing the Sad Girl Hours hoodie just because it spoke to him as far as how he feels about football and in his life and what really sports has given to him.
Can you speak to the strategy of being authentic with Sad Girl Hours, like being vulnerable and willing to talk about mental health, and how that authenticity helps grow the popularity?
Yes, I think the moment as athletes or really as anyone, we can be vulnerable and let people into our thoughts and feelings, particularly into sport. Um, you just open up a range of people that may have not ever even talked about how they feel about their sport or how they feel since they stopped playing sports, right? The moment you can get people talking, you figure out who also relates to you because so many times when we talk about just mental health and people struggling with their mental health, a lot of it is just because they feel like they don't have someone to talk to, or they feel like um, they may be the only person that is going through this and they don't necessarily know how to reach out for help or how to talk to it. But the moment you see other people, maybe that you look up to or that you're friends with or that really starting to share your story, to me it creates this community, right? Something that we can all relate to. And when you go to the comments section, to me, I've always with social media, I've never been concerned about followers and likes. I've always been concerned with shares, saves, and comments. Because to me, if you can get someone to take time out of their day to just comment, think about the millions of things that we see on social media. If they took the time um, to not just make you feel seen because you posted that, but they feel seen because they can relate to the message, or now they want to share it to their friends, or they want to save it so that they can go back to it. Um, it it means the world, right? And to me, at the end of the day, we're in this world to connect, to relate, to build community, and I think that's what Sad Girl Hours helps and does, even though it's super niche.
So you're also an NIL advisor, first at Baylor and now with Chloe Rose Consulting. What are the best strategies for helping female athletes find endorsement deals? And can you speak to how important endorsement deals are to increasing the popularity of women's sports?
Yes. I think you see endorsements and sponsorships and everything that that we do in sports. And I think in particularly when we talk about the NBA as a whole, right? And the common argument always is like the NBA, they put butts in seats, right? And I think the biggest thing is what, maybe the average person doesn't understand, but the majority of the NBA's revenue comes from sponsorships, right? And broadcasting rights. And to me, when you relate it back to women's sports, women hold the buying power in households, right? Like women spend so much money year to year, significantly more than men. And so when we're able to put sponsorships and we're able to put endorsement deals and attach them to women, um, you open it up for more people to see, more people to really connect with, because brand loyalty, right? That's the number one most important thing. So if we invest in girls at a young age, right, they're going to continue to be loyal to that brand, which is going to help with consumer spend with that brand, and not just put money into those women's athletes' pockets, but also put money into those brands' pockets. And I think the more and more brands can invest in women and women of color, just to show like equal representation, to show that, oh my gosh, like I can be like her, or I can relate to her. And now that brand and that athlete are kind of synonymous. Um, I think it just opens up a door of opportunities, right? And I think it also starts to level the playing field with how much women are paid, and women being compensated for what they're worth, right? Like doing the same amount of work that a man does, but at the same time, you're being equally compensated for it. I think it just pushes the bar, and puts men and women on more of an equal playing field.
Um, all right, so now think back to your days at Big Ten Network. As a journalist, you're selling storylines and bringing out the best in the personalities of the athletes. How do you go the extra mile to make storylines and personalities exciting and compelling when you're promoting them as a broadcaster?
Oh, that's a really good question. Um, I think the most important thing is really taking time to uh, build relationships with the teams and the athletes specifically, right? So there are, this, there are lots of journalists. Um, People want to cover everything as far as what goes into the game, what goes into the preparation. But if you really don't spend time with that athlete or those teams consistently, there are so many other things that they do that are so compelling and so interesting that they may not even think is interesting enough to tell you as a journalist. But if you can spend time with them and kind of figure out some of the other things that they're involved in and that they're passionate about, when you begin to start to tell those stories, there's this level of vulnerability that then the athlete or the coach or the team start to share with you that they wouldn't necessarily share with anyone else. And I think as a journalist, and when you work for a media outlet or if you work for yourself, the more you feel passionate about the athlete and the team you're covering, right? The more you're going to help spread their message, right? The more you're going to push to your network how, hey, we need to get more coverage for this women's athlete or this women's sports because they do XYZ. And I think it's something different. I think it's something unique and it's actually something they enjoy talking about and telling. And so when you're passionate about something as a journalist, I think um the way you cover it and the way you tell that story, it becomes some of your best work. And at the same time, if it's something that the athlete wants to talk about, they'll also continue to repost or share what you did about them, right? And I think it kind of always stems back to when women's athletes in particular get coverage, right? They a lot of times they thank the media and they thank journalists for coming, right? Even though that may be that media outlet or that journalist's job to cover that, right? Versus men historically are so used to having so much coverage, they don't say thank you. It's just an expectation. And I think um, when we can get there as media outlets so that, women don't thank us for coming, they just expect us to be there. I think that's when we'll really see that okay, we're making a difference and we're really investing in not just women's athletes but women's sports as a whole.
All right, so I gotta ask you about Asia Wilson because she's got Usher singing to her in the front row. You've got Sydney Colson telling jokes, just an all-around hilarious team in the Aces. Do you think they're making journalist jobs easy when it comes to promoting the now two-time defending champions of the league? And do you think an Aces dynasty could greatly increase the popularity of women's sports?
Absolutely. I think that the Aces, just as a team, as a whole, they're a marketing dream. The moment you can get, I and I think the beauty of it is they almost take coverage into their own hands, and I think they do realize that. But I also just think they're so comfortable with each other and they have so much fun that to me, every day when they get on social media, it's a story, right? Like it's funny, it keeps you engaged, it keeps you entertained, and they make you feel like you really know them, right? Like I we all feel like we are friends. Well, I actually am friends with Sydney Colson, but we all feel like that we're her friend, right? We all feel like, yes, Asia Wilson is one of the greatest players to ever live, but we feel like we have such an insight into her life and we really get to see her personality. I think it's it's very rare that you get such a successful team to be so open into their day-to-day lives, right? I don't really know how often we see that in sports, that there's so many players on one team that are characters. And I think that the Aces, I also think they have a really good social media team, and a really good marketing team, because anytime that these athletes talk about something on social media, and it gets play, it goes viral, or however you want to put it, then the team account really leans into whatever topics they're covering, right? So it almost gives you, if you just follow the Las Vegas Aces team account and they post something about whatever the women were doing or talking about, as a fan, it almost makes you feel like you're missing out if you're not following Sydney Colson and Asia Wilson, because then you may not be able to understand what the team account posted. So I just think the Aces do a really good job as a whole. I love them, and I think they're just a marketer's dream.
So my lit review for this project also talked about the association with men's leagues being really important, like rivalries in men's basketball or football at the college level being hyped up in all the women's sports, or the Mystics and Wizards doing stuff together. Can you just talk about how huge it was for Sabrina to take on Steph in a 3-point contest at the NBA All-Star game?
Yeah, I think it was great. I think both Steph and Sabrina did a really good job leaning into the contest. And I think um for those of us that really appreciate women's sports and women's athletes and just the game of basketball as a whole. If you can shoot, you can shoot, right? And I think it was really important for Sabrina to shoot from the NBA 3-point line. And why do I think that? Not necessarily that she has anything to prove to herself, because I know that she is one of the best shooters in the world, but because you don't want to give anyone the opportunity to discredit your work, right? So if she shoots from a WNBA line that is closer to the basket than an NBA line, if she beats Steph, right, there's going to be this, well, she wasn't shooting at the NBA 3-point line. She was shooting at the WNBA 3-point line. Even though Steph Curry, who's one of the greatest shooters in the world, acknowledges regardless that she's a phenomenal shooter. And the thing that I think people don't understand, that as shooters and shooters like Sabrina is like, yeah, she was shooting from the NBA 3-point line because she consistently practices from a deeper range, right? When you're a great shooter, you practice from close, from far. It doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, you want to be able to shoot from anywhere, right? You don't want anyone to give you the light, right? And what do I mean by giving you the light? When teams play against you, if you're a great shooter, they're on you no matter what. So you have to deepen your range, right? To keep the defense on their toes and ready at any time. And I think it was huge for the game. I hope it's something that the NBA continues to do. I think it just opens up an entirely different fan base for women's sports. And at the same time, I think it's an event that is so different and so unique, and really takes it back to the Billie Jean King days and the battle of the sexes, that gets everyone talking about it, and that is exciting. So I think it was great, and I loved how both athletes handled it. I was rooting for Sabrina, but hopefully next year they do it again, or that they use another women's athlete to try to beat Steph Curry.
So last couple questions here. What do you think about the underdog story of women, them being discriminated against in so many ways, both in sports and outside sports? Everybody loves an underdog story. So do you think that that gives women's sports an appeal that men's sports actually don't have, that we can take advantage of in promotion?
I think it's tough, because I don't necessarily know if I want to call it the underdog story. Um because I really just think it all stems from, to your point, like just lack of awareness and a lack of coverage, right? So to me, why is why does men's sports have more popularity, right? And why does the NBA as a whole have more popularity than the WNBA? Well, his a historical context lets us know that men have been playing sports far longer than women have, right? Especially when we go through the history and we look at the introduction into Title IX, right? And still, how, in the grand scheme of things, young Title IX is to the history of sports, even starting as a whole with baseball. Um, and I think when you really, really think about it, it's that women just haven't had the same opportunities as men, right? Even from a sports perspective, but particularly from a coverage perspective. And the moment we can continue to um, keep showcasing women and women's sports on bigger outlets, on linear television, on the main channels, right? Like ABC. Whenever we do that, we see that the audience shows up, right? We just have to give women a platform. So I don't necessarily know if I want if I believe in like kind of championing that underdog story. I think the more we can focus on providing equal opportunities to give women's sports to succeed, and women's athletes opportunities to grow and transcend into superstars and new fandoms, I think that's the lens that I would dive all in on focusing on.
Yeah, totally. And then my last question is just, are there any other strategies for improving the popularity you want to mention that I haven't thought of, or any closing thoughts?
Oof. You asked like really, really great questions that I don't think anyone has ever asked me. So I thoroughly enjoyed this, and I think you made so many great points. I'm trying to think if there's something else that I would add, that I think could help. And I think I touched on it earlier, but to me, everything starts at the grassroots level. I've said this before, and it's I used to use the comparison of Candace Parker and LeBron James, right? So if we really, really, really covered Candace Parker at starting in seventh grade, which I feel like I first heard about LeBron when he was in junior high. If we gave them that same amount of coverage, how much bigger would Candace Parker be and the WNBA be today? And so, what do I relate that to? For me, um, there's there's two players for me that stick out that I'd say one player in particular is Jada Williams, who I started covering when she was in fifth grade. And I've always thought, okay, she got to college with 600,000 followers on Instagram. Um, and so to me, it's like, okay, what will Jada leave with from college, right? So she already went to college having endorsement deals. She already went to college knowing um, that she should have coverage, right? So she kind of gets that point. And I'd say the other athlete is Paige Beckers. Now she was one of those athletes I started covering a little bit later because actually AZ Fudd was the one that told me that we needed to be covering her. And I believe at that time Paige Beckers was a junior in high school, and I think she went to UConn with, I want to say, around 500,000 followers. And now she has over 1 million followers. So to kind of see, like, okay, we started this coverage earlier with social media to kind of build these athletes up. And to me, if we can focus on coverage and specifically with women's athletes at the grassroots level, um, where can their stardom transcend to, right? Because there was a time where I would go, um, I the first time I actually got to see Jada Williams play in person, I couldn't even get into the gym. And it was the same thing with Paige Beckers, right? It was the court to be on, it was the person to watch, and the way young girls and people around that were at those tournaments were watching them was like they were superstars, right? Like the pictures, the autographs, all of the things. And it's like, okay, can we keep that? Can we keep that going, right? And I think you see it particularly with Caitlin Clark right now, and I think you see it more and more with Asia Wilson. Like, had this stuff really been around when Asia Wilson was in junior high, you know, where would her stardom be? So that would be my only thing, and I don't know if I echoed it before, but just was more coverage at that foundational grassroots level, and continuing that coverage um, through their college careers. Now, I think school matters because of broadcasting rights and opportunities, and how good your team is as a whole, right? Because if you can get to the Final Four when all eyes are really on women's basketball and March Madness at that time, that helps takes your following to new heights. And you know, same thing with Angel Reese. We started covering her maybe as a sophomore, you know, and I think when she left Maryland, she had around 76,000 followers, and she just really she has a great personality, and she leans into that personality on the court, off the court. We see it. She knows how to kind of capitalize on the moment. And so, if as we see this continued coverage of her, where can her stardom and her fandom get to, right? Because I believe she's probably, I think she's the most followed athlete in women's basketball as a whole. I don't know where she ranks as far as overall women's athletes, but I believe she has the highest following of any WNBA player or college player. But don't quote me on that. I
So
think
just
that's it. Sorry for taking up so much of your time.
no, that's fine. Thanks for taking the time. So just covering them at younger and younger ages.
Yep, at the
Totally.
grassroots level.
All right, well, those are my questions. Thanks, Chloe. I really appreciate it. It was great talking to you. Third time now.
Yes, Zach, thank you so much. I'm so glad you reached out. And if there's ever a story, whatever it is, like I'm always, if it's you, I'm always happy to do it.